Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking on a true intellectual monument.
Hmm.
It's a work that really tries to fundamentally redefine the architecture of, well, of human existence.
It absolutely
We're
does.
launching an in-depth exploration, a Shara Mufassal of Abdul-Jabbar Al-Waili's sweeping philosophical text, Al-Aqwal wal-Nafs wal-Ruh.
The mind, the soul, and the spirit.
Exactly.
And this is a book that, it really demands your full attention. Well, Wiley isn't just synthesizing old ideas here.
No, not at all.
He's challenging them. He promises a tarif jadid, a new definition, for basically every core concept you can think of related to consciousness.
So for you listening, our mission is to, well, to cut through the complexity of this huge work.
Right. We want to move systematically through his whole architectural breakdown of the mind, the self, and then the spirit.
We need to understand how he connects your innermost thoughts
Yeah.
directly to the deepest metaphysical structure of the entire universe.
Yeah, and it's a huge task. We're dealing with philosophy, psychology, biology, metaphysics.
Yeah.
It's all interwoven.
So how do we even start to make sense of a system where, for example, will is more fundamental than reason?
Or where the basic building blocks of reality are themselves conscious entities.
Exactly. So here's our trajectory. We'll start small. We'll look at the functional parts of the mind first.
Then we'll zoom out, way out, to the cosmic source of that mind.
And finally, we bring it all back to the dynamic, messy reality of the soul and, the eternal nature of the spirit.
It's a profoundly integrated worldview. You can see he just rejects the common approach of, say, treating the mind as a purely physiological function.
Or the soul is just this vague, nebulous feeling.
Precisely. For him, conscious existence is a continuous, interconnected system, and it's all structured by four, as he says, indispensable intellectual faculties.
Okay, let's unpack this system. Let's start with Al-Aqwal, the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Al-Waili insists the mind is not a single monolithic thing, but a dynamic system, a system of four working faculties.
And the first one, this is the absolute foundation.
It's al-irada, the will, the primacy of will. This is where Al-Waili immediately sets himself apart from, well, a lot of earlier thinkers.
Oh, absolutely. He argues that the mind, al-aql, is intrinsically linked to will. You literally cannot have one without the other.
So the will isn't just a tool the mind uses to decide things, like should I have coffee or tea?
Not at all. It's a fundamental, inherent characteristic of the mind itself. It's crucial for initiating any intellectual movement, any action at all.
Okay, so think of it this way for me. For Al-Waili, if a decision or an action happens without the prerequisite of conscious will, what is it then?
Then it isn't an intellectual act, full stop. It's just a mechanical response.
Like a reflex.
A reflex, exactly. Or maybe an instinctual reaction, a chemical process. True intellectual quality, the very essence of the mind, requires the will to proceed and direct the energy of that action.
So without the will, the mind is just.
It's dormant, it's offline.
So the will isn't just about choosing between A and B, it's the foundational engine of our agency.
That's a great way to put it. It determines what you seek, what you desire, and what you consciously reject.
But he adds a really critical layer of nuance here, and this seems important for later on when we talk about the soul.
It is.
He distinguishes between will as an original intellectual faculty and will as an inherited habit. Osanyishi.
And that distinction is just crucial for understanding human freedom and development. The intellectual will is that spontaneous, conscious, directed effort of the developed mind.
The hard work.
The hard work, yes. On the other hand, the inherited or habitual will, it looks willful, but it's really a repetitive action. Often it's subconscious.
Or even genetically passed down.
Right, and it requires minimal intellectual effort. If your hand instinctively recoils from a hot stove, that's not your intellectual will making a calculated decision.
That's an inherited protective habit.
Exactly. True will is the capacity to choose against that habit or instinct based on some kind of rational foresight.
It sounds like he's saying that most of what we do day to day just runs on this efficient habitual will.
It does.
But real intellectual development, real growth, requires us to constantly engage that original demanding intellectual will.
If you spend too much time on autopilot, the will atrophies. That's his point.
And the active nature of that intellectual will, that connects directly to the second faculty, right?
It does. It leads us straight to perception, Ali Drek.
So perception, as he defines it, it's not just sensory input, is it? It's not just seeing and hearing.
No, it's the mental faculty that's focused on receiving and, crucially, understanding external phenomena.
The Sai-Sei-Cie.
Yes, the real things out there, and then linking them back to your internal consciousness. Your say.
It's the moment the external world meets your sense of self.
And this is where the will comes roaring back in. Perception, in Al-Waili's view, is explicitly not passive.
It's not a camera just recording the world.
Absolutely not. It requires an active will to engage with the object you're perceiving, to focus on it, to synthesize it, to understand it.
So if the will stops its action,
Perception stops. It just ceases. You might still be receiving sensory data, light hitting your retina, sound vibrating your eardrum, but without the intellectual will engaging, there is no meaningful perception happening.
it's just noise.
It's just noise, raw data.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
We've all had that experience, right? Staring blankly at a page in a book or listening to someone talk, but your mind is a million miles away. The sensory input is there, the words are entering your ears, but the will to perceive is completely absent.
And Al-Waili takes this even further. He says the two pillars of perception are that combination of sensory input, CO, and your internal consciousness, COA.
And both have to be actively directed by the will.
Both. He explicitly states that if the will were absent, any movement resulting from perception, what he calls the intentional, directed biological movement,
The Shiwa to say,
that movement would not lead to life in any intellectually meaningful way. Life would just be a series of random, undirected, non-self-aware reactions.
okay, so if will directs perception, how does the mind decide where to direct that will in the first place?
Good question.
That has to take us to the third faculty, alistanta, the faculty of enjoyment or pleasure.
Right, and it's so important not to confuse this with simple hedonism, with just chasing pleasure.
It's not about that.
No. Al-Waili defines enjoyment as an essential intellectual function. Its job is to judge perceived objects and potential actions based on their utility for you as an individual.
So it asks what truly brings benefit versus what leads to harm.
Exactly. It's the mind's built-in ethical and survival compass, and its job is to guide the trajectory of the will.
So if the will is the engine, enjoyment is kind of the GPS.
That's a great analogy.
It's calculating the best route for your long-term survival and flourishing. I like that framing. The mind intervenes to calculate the eventual results of actions, not just the immediate pleasure.
Absolutely. The mind's job is to prevent the pursuit of that immediate transient gratification if that gratification undermines the greater sustained good of the individual.
So if enjoyment is unregulated by the mind and will,
It becomes a blind impulse. We chase something that feels good now but is ultimately destructive in the long run.
this is where he connects this very specific intellectual faculty to his much bigger metaphysical claim.
Yes, this is a huge leap.
He links profound, sustained intellectual enjoyment, not just to physical comfort, but to the continuity of intellectual life after death. This is a deep point, and we have to unpack it carefully. Al-Waili is arguing that shallow, purely physical enjoyment is ephemeral. It's temporary. It dies with the body and leaves no lasting intellectual impression.
Okay.
But the sustained satisfaction you get from intellectual pursuit, from conscious virtue, from the active exercise of the mind's highest functions, that is tied to the enduring essence of your being.
To the spirit, which we'll get to later. Exactly. By pursuing the naf, the real benefit that the mind identifies, rather than the transient pleasure that raw instinct demands, you are actively strengthening the intellectual structure that persists beyond your physical life.
In other words, truly intellectual enjoyment is fundamentally tied to the development and continuation of the conscious self. And that self has an eternal component.
Right. Blind impulse fails this test because it's localized only to the physical moment. It has no future view.
And the ability to even make that distinction between lasting benefit and fleeting impulse relies entirely on the fourth and final faculty.
It does. It relies on retention and memory. Malakat amohafada al-takira.
Retention amofada.
Yeah.
This is the indispensable function responsible for preserving information, ideas, slotshon, and all of your previous perceptions.
It's the intellectual archive.
Right.
It's the faculty that enables comparison, synthesis, continuity. Without retention, your mind can't build knowledge.
Your will would just be acting blindly all the time.
Constantly. Never learning from past mistakes or successes. I mean, if you can't retain the memory of past harm, how can the faculty of enjoyment guide your will toward long-term benefit? It has no data to work with.
So the four faculties really are an airtight circuit. Let's just trace that dependency one more time, because he stresses that if one of them stops, all the intellectual work stops.
Okay, yeah. Think of it as a feedback loop. You need retention to hold the data, right? Past benefits, past harms.
Got it. The archive.
That data then informs the faculty of enjoyment, which assesses the utility of something and sets a goal, like pursue benefit.
GPS.
That goal then triggers the will, the engine of action.
Okay.
The will then actively engages perception, which synthesizes new sensory input with your internal consciousness, and the results of that active perception are then immediately stored by
Retention. It goes right back into the archive, and the loop starts again.
And if retention breaks, the will has no history, enjoyment has no basis for judgment, and perception yields no meaning. The whole system collapses.
Wow. That makes the mind sound less like a passive recipient of information and more like a high-powered, perpetually running engine focused solely on maximizing intellectual life and long-term benefit.
That's a perfect summary of it.
But this complex machine, this engine, it needs a fundamental source. If the mind is this finely tuned engine of four faculties, where does the fuel come from? What is the actual stuff of this consciousness?
And that takes us into the metaphysics.
And into Al-Waily's truly radical concept.
This is where we shift gears completely. We're moving from the psychological operation of the mind to the fundamental question of existence itself.
Is the mind purely material, or does it require an independent principle?
And to answer that, Al-Waily introduces a concept that redefines the very building blocks of reality. So Al-Waily begins this part with a really sharp critique of purely materialist philosophies. He questions the whole idea of life and mind emerging from inanimate matter.
He's tackling views like Darwinism, which were, a big deal in his era.
Right, and he focuses on that fundamental philosophical hurdle, the problem of life's origin.
He's asking that classic question. If the simplest form of life, the primary cell, CNA, arises purely from chemical combinations of dead matter,
right,
how does it suddenly acquire consciousness, agency, the inherent will to keep itself going? Where does purpose come from?
Exactly. The material components, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, the standard chemical atoms, the crunchy set, they only explain the formation of complex structures and compounds.
They don't explain the life part.
They do not, in Al-Waily's view, explain the innate eternal self-perpetuation, the crise day of life. You can mix all the right chemicals that form a cell in a test tube, but you still haven't explained the life inherent within it.
So for him, material atoms are not a sufficient foundation for consciousness.
Not even close. So if complex atoms aren't the foundation, he has to introduce something simpler, something more fundamental.
And something that is inherently conscious.
That's the key. And he calls this foundational unit the monad, or almonut.
Oh.
The monads? The monads are the simple, fundamental elements of existence, but they are critically distinct from complex atoms. Al-Waily posits them as the original sources of two primary attributes.
Light and movement. Sandhya and Sanya.
Right. These are the first pure expressions of the monad's being.
Wait, light and movement, is he being metaphorical here or literal?
It's a bit of both, but he treats them as fundamental physical and spiritual manifestations. Light, in this sense, can be understood as the source of intellectual visibility or comprehension.
I see.
And movement is the source of all dynamic action and change in the universe. But the truly radical philosophical leap, the game changer, is his assertion that monads possess mind and will as inherent attributes.
So, wait, Al-Waily solves the problem of life's origin by basically saying that consciousness isn't emergent. It's foundational.
Exactly. Consciousness is baked into the very simplest element of reality from the beginning.
Which makes the monads fundamentally non-material. They're spiritual entities.
They have to be. So the individual mind, that sophisticated four-faculty system we just talked about, is simply a collection of these conscious, willing monads working in concert.
And this ties back perfectly to what we said earlier. The life and continuity of that primary cell are dependent entirely on its constituent monads and their intellectual attributes.
Right. If the monad's inherent will and intellectual function were to cease, life itself in that material form would just poof. It would cease to be.
The body is a mechanism.
But the monads are the conscious spark. They're the driver.
This brings us to the hierarchical structure of consciousness then. The individual mind and the general mind.
The fleeting away on the food and the feeder.
So the individual mind, that's our everyday localized consciousness. A specific group of monads working locally, addressing our limited goals, guided by its four faculties.
Correct.
But what is the general mind, And how does it relate to us?
The general mind, food to put in food, is the overarching universal intellectual unity. If your individual mind is like a small processing unit, a single computer,
Then the general mind is the cosmic server, or the cloud.
the cloud, that's a perfect modern analogy. It manages and regulates all existence and all movement, encompassing every monad in nature, ensuring cosmic order and persistence.
So it's not just a collection of all individual minds, it's a higher organizing principle.
It is the ultimate source of order, and our connection to reality, the sana, flows through this whole system. The individual mind connects to the absolute reality, the general mind, not just through unreliable secondary attributes like raw sensory input, but through the primary attributes, light, movement, and will, that emanate from the monads themselves.
This changes the nature of thought itself then. If our mind is made of monads, then our ideas, our sunad, they can't just be chemical reactions in the brain.
No, they're not. Ideas are defined as conceptual impressions stored directly within the monads that constitute your individual mind.
Wow.
And critically, these individual monads are constantly interacting, consciously or not, with that vast universal reservoir of the general mind.
Which suggests that when you have a sudden flash of insight, a brilliant idea that seems to come from nowhere,
It might be more than just local processing.
it's your individual monad group momentarily accessing a higher truth held within the general mind.
That is one of the main implications, yes. Al-Waily suggests that the quality and the depth of your ideas and thoughts depend heavily on the level of development and intellectual activity of the individual monads that make up your mind.
So a highly developed mind is one whose monads are more actively and successfully reflecting the order found in the general mind.
Precisely. The potential for intellectual growth is literally the potential for your constituent spiritual building blocks to elevate their function.
Okay, we've established the conscious framework, the four faculties, and the metaphysical substance, the monads. Now we have to bridge that gap, the gap between pure intellectual function and the reality of lived human experience, the emotions, the instincts, the chaos of the self.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
The soul isn't just a place for feelings. In this system, it's the battleground, where the mind and our deepest monad-driven instincts collide.
Exactly. The term he uses for the soul, al-nafs, specifically refers to the dynamic self. It is the union, and often a very turbulent one, of the conscious, rational mind.
The soul.
And the subconscious, the suase, which, in this context, is the repository of all the emotions. The soul and the inherent urges, the suase.
So the soul is the interface. It's the meeting point where that disciplined, long-sighted will encounters the raw, primal energy of existence and all of our inherited drives.
A perfect description.
So how does the system define emotions then?
Well, emotions for Al-Waily are what he calls vital movements, aleafe, that accompany the will. They aren't random, they are indicators.
Feedback.
Their feedback, classified precisely based on their direction relative to the will's goals, is this leading to benefit or harm, to persistence or destruction.
Okay, give us some examples of that classification.
So you have the positive emotions, the sani-si. These are movements that actively serve the will's rational requirements.
Like love, joy, pleasure, kindness.
Yes. They affirm the direction the mind is taking toward long-term benefit. They're a yes.
And the negative ones.
Then there are the negative emotions, the sei-si. These represent obstacles or a rejection of the will's requirements.
So hate, anger, pain, fear, sadness.
Exactly. They are signals that the current state or object is detrimental to the self's persistence. They're a no.
It's a beautifully functional approach.
Mm-hmm.
Emotions aren't moral judgments in and of themselves. They are feedback mechanisms showing how successfully the will is navigating reality.
That's it. Even emotions like the love of beauty, okireko, are tied directly to the will's inherent requirement for pleasure and life continuation.
How so?
Well, the sense of beauty serves the general requirements of life, the eight kihes. If something is beautiful, it often suggests utility or health or order qualities the will inherently desires for the benefit of the self.
And the rejection of ugliness, siye, is an emotional movement away from potential harm or disorder.
You've got it.
This systematic view of emotions naturally leads us to learned behavior and efficiency, which he calls habits, el-adat. Where do habits fit in this dynamic self?
Habits are repetitive actions that have, through repeated performance over time, sometimes over a lifetime, but often across generations.
Right.
They've migrated from requiring intense, conscious, intellectual will to becoming mechanical, subconscious movements.
That is the ultimate cognitive efficiency hack. I mean, tying your shoes, driving a familiar route.
Hmm.
These actions used to demand concentrated intellectual will and retention.
A lot of it.
But now they run on muscle memory, which Al-Waily basically sees as a form of subconscious programming.
And that frees up the intellectual will for novel, challenging, and truly important decisions. He specifically discusses what he calls inherited habits. These are subconscious actions and reactions passed down genetically, survival instincts, basic social responses that no longer require your individual mind's intervention to get started.
So good habits, both inherited and acquired, are vital because they help the mind stabilize and control the emotional and instinctive turmoil of the raw urges.
They simplify life, allowing the mind to reserve its precious intellectual will for its higher purpose, which is long-term development and connection to the general mind.
If we had to consciously will every breath, every heartbeat, every single step we took,
Our intellectual capacity would be instantly saturated. There'd be nothing left. Habits allow the dynamic soul, al-nafs, to run on an efficient autopilot.
which gives the conscious mind the space to exercise true free will.
Exactly. And this brings us to that crucial battleground, the mind-soul interplay and the necessity of control.
Al-Waily is very clear here, isn't it?
Extremely clear. The mind's ability to operate independently of immediate, overwhelming emotions, the soen etzanos soet etzo etsu say, is the hallmark of high intellectual development.
The mind must process, rationalize, and guide the will based on the emotions.
But it must never be governed by them. If emotions take control, the individual acts impulsively, driven purely by the raw, primitive drives, the saisi, housed in the subconscious.
This describes the classic human struggle, doesn't it? Choosing rational foresight over a momentary flash of rage or fear.
It's the core of it.
But if the mind isolates itself completely from emotional reality, doesn't it lose its compass? How can it assess utility if it has no feeling for benefit or harm?
And that is the essential balance. A mind completely isolated from emotion can't properly assess the true value of life experiences. It becomes sterile, abstract.
Disconnected from the very self it's supposed to be guiding.
Right. The emotions provide the raw data, the immediate signals of pain or pleasure, that the mind must then process, compare against retained memory, and use to guide the will toward long-term benefit.
It's a continuous, necessary dialogue. The goal isn't suppression, but rational mastery.
That's the perfect term for it, rational mastery.
So the soul is where the individual mind proves its worth by mastering the dynamics of the emotional self, utilizing the efficiency of habits and guiding the whole trajectory away from blind instinct and toward conscious, willed action.
And that mastery is essential because it prepares the being for the final transition. We have mapped the function, the mind, and the dynamics, the soul. Now we move to the final, most enduring part of the system,
The spirit.
the spirit. And Al-Waily reserves this term for the most enduring part of existence, linking individual consciousness all the way back to the fundamental nature of the monads and the general mind.
We really need to clearly define the spirit, Auru, because he makes a very strong distinction. The spirit is not just the mind, and it's not the dynamic soul.
No, it's something more fundamental. The spirit is defined as the simple, eternal, inherent essence.
The Kahal, the monad, the Ka constitutes the core of the living being. It is the consciousness, the pure I am, residing in that fundamental unit of our existence. So the monad is the spiritual building block, and the spirit is the inherent quality of eternal consciousness that resides within that monad.
Correct.
Why does he emphasize its simplicity so much?
Because simplicity guarantees immortality. Think about it. If a substance is compound, made of multiple parts, it can be broken down. It can be divided and destroyed.
Okay, I see.
But because the monad is a simple substance, it is indivisible. And because it's indivisible, it is therefore eternal and indestructible.
The spirit embodies this perpetual simplicity, and that's what guarantees the continuity of consciousness.
Right. This provides a really robust philosophical grounding for the concept of immortality, for ekshi.
It does. Immortality, then, stems directly from the spirit being the simple, indivisible monad itself.
So death, in this framework is not extinction. It's not the end.
It's a transition.
It is merely the transition of the spirit of the monad from a limited life, stuje, inside a complex physical structure to an eternal, more expansive state.
The suiting
Where it's free to reconnect more broadly with the general mind, the core consciousness is never lost.
This necessity of eternal connection brings us back to the cosmic level, to the profound unity of existence, the show that he insists upon.
He posits a complete operational unity between the individual mind, the soul, and the general mind. All of existence, including all monads and the general mind, are connected and mutually influential.
So the individual mind is a specific, localized, and temporary expression of that universal consciousness, the general mind.
That's it.
This gives the general mind a massive responsibility. It sounds like the ultimate conductor of the universe's orchestra.
That's an accurate way to see it. The general mind's primary function is to regulate all phenomena, all esha, in the universe. It generates and sustains the primary attributes, light, movement, and will, that govern nature.
And its job is to ensure order and persistence, to make sure the system doesn't just descend into chaos.
Exactly. Our individual minds are temporary, localized processors within this infinitely larger, eternal system.
So, if reality is structured by the general mind, then the reality we perceive through our senses is just a filtered, localized version of the absolute truth.
Precisely. The reality perceived by your individual mind is constructed from impressions stored within its monads, the ser afskim, ideas based on its limited, localized experience.
But the true, absolute reality, the ser shin,
is the general mind, expressed through those pure, primary attributes. The constant interaction between our monads and the general mind is the source of all profound knowledge.
And the more developed the monads in our mind are,
the closer they can approximate that absolute reality.
Okay, this leads us to the final, and I think most critical point we have to address in this system, the tension between cosmic order and individual choice. If the general mind regulates all existence and ensures cosmic order, how can the individual mind truly possess free will? Isn't our choice just an illusion managed by the cosmic consciousness?
That is a powerful, critical question, and Al-Waily anticipates it. He defines free will very specifically, and he links it directly to the developmental stage of your individual mind.
Okay, so what is it then?
Free will is not the ability to violate the laws of the general mind. You can't just break the rules of the universe. Rather, it is the ability of your individual mind to choose between conflicting emotions and urges.
To choose between the immediate, raw demands of the subconscious.
And the rational, long-term calculation of the will.
So it's not freedom from the system, but freedom within the system.
Exactly. The mind's capacity to rise above mere reaction and determine its own course, guided by developed reason, al-al, rather than raw instinct, al-garaiz. That is its freedom.
When a person chooses patience over immediate anger,
or long-term investment over fleeting pleasure,
they are exercising their free will.
They are. They're demonstrating the supremacy of their developed intellectual faculties over their primal mechanical drives. And in doing so, they are aligning their limited existence with the higher intellectual unity of the general mind, which always seeks persistence and order.
That really reframes personal responsibility. You are free only to the extent that you are intellectual.
In a sense, yes. When you act mechanically or purely emotionally, you are essentially forfeiting your freedom and acting as an automated mechanism within that cosmic structure.
So the ultimate expression of freedom is the willful utilization of all four intellectual faculties.
Will, perception, enjoyment, and retention.
To synthesize knowledge and act according to enlightened self-interest, ensuring the continuity of the intellectual life.
Which is, in his view, the ultimate destiny of the spirit.
Wow. This has been an incredibly rigorous and expansive deep dive into a text that truly offers a structural blueprint for consciousness. So, to quickly summarize the revolutionary synthesis Al-Waily presents, the mind, al-aql, is a highly organized engine of four interconnected dynamic faculties.
You have will as the initiator.
Perception as the bridge to the self.
Enjoyment as the utility compass.
And retention as the necessary archive.
And we grounded this whole system in his metaphysics by establishing that the universe is built not on dead matter, but on spiritual monads, Sienisa, that inherently possess mind and will.
These monads form our individual mind and are all regulated by the cosmic consciousness, the general mind, ENCA.
Right. Then the soul, al-nafs, acts as the dynamic interface, the battleground between the conscious will and the subconscious emotions and urges.
which can be stabilized through the efficiency of habits.
And finally, the spirit, Al-Ru, is that eternally simple, conscious, and indivisible core of the monad itself.
Which guarantees immortality and ensures that death is simply a transition into a more expansive state of existence, always remaining connected to the general mind.
That's the whole system in a nutshell.
This deep dive into the mind, the soul, and the spirit provides a powerful framework for understanding human existence not as some random biological accident, but as a hierarchical, integrated system of intellectual faculties, all intimately linked to the fundamental spiritual substance of the universe.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought for you to take away.
Go for it.
If our individual consciousness is fundamentally composed of monads that possess will and intellect as inherent attributes, what level of unexplored potential, what latent power for influence and creation lies dormant within the simple elements that make up our very existence? And if the general mind is the guarantor of cosmic order, how should that awareness shift our perception of personal responsibility and destiny when you consider that our actions are ultimately ripples in a universal ocean of consciousness?
Something to mull on until our next deep dive. Thank you for joining us on this ambitious intellectual journey.